Microsoft Copilot just crossed 20 million paid seats. Annualized revenue, $14 billion, 67% of those users, daily active. By every metric Wall Street trusts, enterprise AI is working. The Capex bet is paying off. The flywheel is spinning. Now read the second number. MIT's NANDA initiative just finished an 18-month study of 300 enterprise AI deployments. They're finding 95% of generative AI pilots deliver zero measurable return on investment. Both numbers are true. Both come from the same fiscal quarter. Both describe the same enterprises buying the same software. This is episode 5 of the AI money flow. The gap between those two numbers is what $725 billion in Capex is silently betting against. Episode 1 of this series put the headline number on the table. In 2026, the 5 biggest hyperscalers, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Meta, and Oracle, will spend $725 billion on AI infrastructure, up 77% from last year. To justify that spend at a 25% return on capital, the threshold every public company's CFO bakes into approval memos, AI needs to generate roughly $169 billion in annual revenue by the end of 2028. Where does that number stand today? About $150 billion annualized. AWUs at $150 billion across all cloud. Google Cloud at $80 billion, growing 63%. Microsoft's AI business at $37 billion, growing 123%. Add it up, strip out non-AI cloud, and you land in the ballpark of where you need to be. The math works. This is the slide every hyperscaler CFO has drilled into. It is also the slide that does not survive contact with the underlying customer data. Because that $150 billion is not coming from a smooth distribution of healthy AI deployments. It is coming from a small number of customers who got AI to work, and a much larger number paying for software they cannot actually deploy. MIT's NANDA initiative, the Applied AI Research Group at the Sloan School, spent 18 months mapping how 300 enterprise generative AI deployments actually performed. They interviewed 150 business leaders, surveyed 350 employees inside deploying companies, cross-referenced public statements with internal usage data. The headline finding came out in August 2025, and the industry has been quietly reckoning with it ever since. 95% of generative AI pilots deliver no measurable impact on profit and loss. Not small impact, not indirect impact, no measurable impact. The 5% that do work generate substantial revenue acceleration, the kind of double-digit margin expansion that justifies the Capex bet on a single customer. But the other 95% never escape pilot purgatory. The diagnosis from the MIT team is precise. Failure is not driven by model quality. The models are good enough. Failure is driven by what they call the learning gap. The inability of generic AI tools to adapt to a company's specific workflows, and the inability of company workflows to absorb generic AI tools. Internally built systems, the kind every Fortune 500 IT department was tasked with prototyping in 2024, succeed about 33% of the time. Externally purchased specialized vendors succeed about 67%, twice the success rate, half the cost. And yet enterprises continue building in-house because building feels like control and buying feels like dependency. The choice between control and outcomes is the one MIT actually documented. Enterprises chose control. They got pilot purgatory. Microsoft 365 Copilot is the largest single enterprise AI deployment in history. 20 million paid seats, $14 billion annualized. Among Fortune 500 customers, 64% have an active deployment, up from 40% at the end of 2024. The usage numbers look healthier still. 67% of enterprise users now interact with Copilot daily, up from 42% a year ago. Average daily interactions per user, 11.3. If you stop reading there, this is the proof point. Enterprise AI scales. The flywheel works. But look at the second data set. Mid-market Copilot adoption, 31%. Small business, 12%. The deeper you go below the Fortune 500, the deeper you go toward customers who actually have to justify ROI before signing, the lower the adoption. And among the Fortune 500 deployments themselves, No public study yet documents productivity displacement. Microsoft has not released a measured output metric for Copilot. The 11.3 daily interactions tell you nothing about whether those interactions replaced an hour of work or generated an extra 2 hours of editing. The honest description of what enterprises are buying is this: a hedge against falling behind. The $30 per user per month seat license is cheap relative to the perceived strategic risk of being the only company in your sector without an AI rollout. So the seat gets bought. Whether the seat produces value is a problem for next quarter's IT director. Call it the Copilot tax. $14 billion of it paid annually, with the productivity bill deferred. The mid-market refusal to follow the Fortune 500 is the first signal that the tax has a ceiling. If Copilot is the seat license story, Salesforce Agentforce is the Agentic story. And on Salesforce's earnings call in February 2026, the numbers looked even better than Microsoft's. Agentforce annual recurring revenue, $800 million. Year-over-year growth, 169%, 29,000 customer deals. Combined with the Data 360 platform, Salesforce's AI portfolio crossed $2.9 billion in ARR, growing more than 200%. And then they introduced a new metric: Agentic Work Units, AWUs, discrete tasks completed by an AI agent. Salesforce reported 2.4 billion AWUs delivered to date, growing 57% quarter over quarter. 2.4 billion sounds enormous until you ask what the average AWU is. Salesforce does not say. The published definition includes any action an agent takes inside the platform: categorizing a support ticket, drafting an email, looking up a record, summarizing a thread. A power user running Agentforce on a support queue might generate 1,000 AWUs in a single shift. A casual user might generate 3. Without a dollar per AWU number, 2.4 billion is activity, not output. It is the agentic equivalent of measuring developer productivity in lines of code written. Plenty of motion, unclear yield. The serious version of the agentic case requires Salesforce to publish two metrics: the dollar yield per AWU and the distribution of AWUs across customer accounts. If those numbers showed the same 5% concentration MIT found, the $800 million ARR is sitting on the same fault line as Copilot's $14 billion. Activity metrics by time. They do not close the adoption gap. The 5% that do clear the productivity bar share 3 patterns. Pattern 1, high frequency, measurable, narrow tasks: software engineering, customer support triage, document review, compliance flagging. Tasks where the unit of work is well-defined, the success criterion is clear, and the volume is high enough that even a 15% automation rate compounds into meaningful labor savings. Pattern 2, specialized vendors, not in-house builds. GitHub Copilot for engineering, Cursor and CodeDM for IDE native coding, Glean for enterprise search, Sierra for customer support agents, Harvey for legal drafting. The MIT data on this is unambiguous. External specialists succeed at 67%. Internal builds succeed at 33%, twice the rate. And the gap is widening as specialists keep training on workflow-specific data the in-house teams cannot match. Pattern 3, power law usage distribution. Within companies that succeed, AI consumption is concentrated in a small number of heavy users, typically 20% of seats driving 80% of value. The other 80% of seats are budgetary insurance, bought to avoid the appearance of falling behind, used rarely or never. Stack those 3 patterns, and the math of the 95% failure rate becomes obvious. Most enterprises pilot AI on the wrong tasks. They build it in-house, they distribute seats broadly rather than concentrating them on the heavy users who would actually convert tooling into output. None of those choices look irrational from inside a corporate IT department in 2024 or 2025. All of them are now identifiable as predictors of failure. The 5% are not magic. They made the 3 correct choices. The Capex bet quietly assumes the other 95% will too. Google Cloud's contracted backlog crossed $460 billion in the most recent quarter, up roughly double sequentially. AWS backlog, similar trajectory. Azure, similar. The bull reading, enterprises are signing multi-year commitments because they see the AI value coming. The Capex is buying capacity that will be consumed. The gap closes itself. The bear reading, supported by the MIT data, enterprises are signing multi-year commitments because they cannot afford to be left without capacity if AI does work. And the contracts cost less than the strategic risk of opting out. The backlog is hedge demand, not value demand. It will materialize as revenue regardless. But it will not necessarily materialize as the productivity displacement that justifies the next round of Capex. Two specific bear cases are worth watching. First, seat license churn. The mid-market adoption number stalling at 31% is the early warning. If the cohort of mid-market customers who bought Copilot in 2025 starts non-renewing in mid-2026 because they cannot document ROI, the next 12 quarters of Microsoft's AI revenue line bend downward. The same dynamic applies to Salesforce. Renewal cohorts matter more than new deal counts. Second, budget rotation from breadth to depth. If enterprises learn from MIT and shift spending from every employee gets a seat to the top 20% get a Tier 1 license with workflow customization, total spend per company may stay flat, but the seat count collapses. The seat count chart on every AI vendor's earnings deck would invert. The companies that price their growth off seat counts would have a problem. Neither case is the cataclysmic bear case where AI doesn't work. Both are the harder case where AI works for some, and the budgets discover it. The adoption gap is not closing because more Capex cannot close it. Capex buys capacity. Closing the gap requires enterprises to learn how to integrate AI into workflows that were not designed for AI. That is an organizational capability question, not a compute question. 3 metrics to watch over the next 4 quarters. 1. Copilot renewal rates by customer cohort, especially the mid-market customers who bought in 2025. 2. Any AI vendor that starts publishing dollar yield per agentic work unit. When that metric becomes standard, the bifurcation between the 5% and 95% stops being hidden. 3. Vendor consolidation, particularly the disappearance of in-house deployments in favor of specialized vendors. The 5% will compound. The 95% will eventually stop paying. Where the line lands between those two outcomes is what determines whether the $725 billion was a generational investment or a generational write-down. Next episode looks at the half of the equation that almost nobody is pricing yet, the power grid.